Say, Dan Bilesma, how would you classify the 2023-24 Seattle Kraken season?
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team, the Seattle Kraken, every single day. My name is Ayala. I am your host of Locked On Kraken, your one and only host of Locked On Kraken. Been with you since the beginning in the expansion draft and all the way up to, unfortunately, another losing season. Before we get into all that, though, let me tell you, today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So, coming in here with an Friday evening episode. It's been a wild and crazy week for me in a great way. I was covering the WNBA draft for CBS Sports, where I am not only a women's basketball analyst, but also an NHL analyst. Got to actually do an interview with Cale Makar for a promo for something that they were doing. So that was pretty cool. But today I'm here to talk about Dan Bilesma. And I want to start with through clips from Dan Bilesma's exit interview with media, I should say, to be clear. The Seattle Kraken, of course, hosted their media exit interviews, locker room cleanup day, etc. The other day. And we're going to go clip by clip and kind of contextualize the Seattle Kraken season. We did a little bit of that with Philip Grubauer, who said once again, and I loved that he corrected in a very polite but also firm way what we saw from him, in his mind, at least, in Philip Grubauer's mind, was never about a lack of confidence. It was a lack of consistency. And that word consistency or inconsistency is a word that I've used a lot on this Seattle Kraken podcast this season. And so for those watching on video, especially, I did a little bit of a cut of some of the facial features of Dan Bilesma while he was answering some of these questions during the exit interview. And you can tell there was frustration. Dan Bilesma talks about disappointment being something that he heard a lot in his interview, his time with players. That's not a secret. We've been talking about it all season. But I suppose what was illuminating for me comes in the form of a very specific question and a little bit of perhaps jovial play between Dan Bilesma and I believe Darren Brown. But, I found some things insightful and also interesting when it comes to why this team underperformed and why there was so much inconsistency, which then led to the disappointment that they're now experiencing as they just finished exit interviews. So let's go back to Dan Bilesma. I have a few different clips, including the one I played at the beginning. I'll play for you again. But so let's go to Dan Bilesma. In addition to that fun little clip of him just kind of breathing heavily into the microphone, which he is known to do, there are other takeaways that I have from Dan Bilesma. We're going to break this down coming up on today's episode. We're also going to assess and analyze Dan Bilesma's first year. And of course, it is a Friday, which means it's a Firebirds Friday. I'm actually recording at the time in real time that the Coachella Valley Firebirds are playing. So I'll give you live updates every once in a while in between segments so we can keep up with your Coachella Valley Firebirds. But as promised, first, let's hear a little bit from Dan Bilesma. So the clip that I'm going to start with is actually Darren Brown asking a question with regard to the changes that were made at the trade deadline and the specific players that were moved at the trade deadline. As a reminder to my everydayers and OGers, and I want to give a shout out to my correspondent on Blue Sky, where we talk Seattle Kraken hockey every once in a while on Blue Sky. But one of our listeners had pointed out some things with regard to a certain player that did get traded at the trade deadline. And it got me thinking and wondering also, as we were seeing the last 19, 20 games, be a little bit different than the rest of the season. Maybe was there a little bit of tension in the locker room? And Darren Brown asked an interesting question. I want you to hear Dan Bilesma's answer, and then he'll break down and do a little bit more analysis when it comes to what went wrong with the Seattle Kraken team.
At the trade deadline, it appeared that you guys actually lost some really key contributors there. So obviously you've talked a lot about the team playing better after the trade deadline. Why do you think that is, that things went better after that, after losing some kind of key players?
It's a good question. And I'll let you contemplate the answer.
Well, good question by Darren Brown. Also, he said thank you to Dan, saying that it was a good question. And then Darren is laughing at that. So I don't know. There is a world in which some of Dan's response is just kind of messing with Darren. But Dan Bilesma said it's a good question if some of your key performers were the ones traded at the trade deadline, and then those players leave, and then this 19-game period that we're going to hear Dan Bilesma talk about in a little bit, that seemed to be the highlight of the season. And he said it's a good question, but he's going to leave that for us to figure out basically for ourselves. Am I the only one that's thinking that's maybe a little bit spicy? That maybe one of our listeners who hit me up on Blue Sky was right about a particular player, but also maybe the cluster of players at that time, that maybe they weren't the best for the energy, the vibes, the juice, the jam, the moxie of this Seattle Kraken team. And maybe if changes had been made earlier, does that mean perhaps potentially that some of these players could have been traded earlier and we would have gotten to our peak, gotten to our identity, gotten to a better, more responsible locker room earlier? Is that what Dan Bilesma wants us to analyze? Who got traded at the deadline? Yanni Gourde, Oliver Bjorkstrand, and Brandon Tanev. I certainly have my thoughts about those three. Bjorkstrand, in my opinion, was a surprising healthy scratch and one of those resets or sending a message. Yanni Gourde, coming straight off of injury. My take on Yanni Gourde is that he had pretty open communication with the Seattle Kraken. The pepper pot, maybe there was frustration that was bubbling over into the locker room, things that media didn't see. What I will say is that Yanni Gourde, the pepper pot for a reason. I liked his style of play. If there was any tension in the locker room, from my vantage point, and in my opinion, it didn't carry over in noticeable ways to me on the ice. Oliver Bjorkstrand, again, I thought it was an interesting, healthy scratch, but Dan Bilesma would know better than me. And then, of course, there's Brandon Tanev, a player that I've been, if you're an everydayer or OGer, scratching my head about, because I love his energy output and let me just go back to that episode. Remind you that I did an episode about his hit on Shane Wright, and that I told you there's a world that exists in which Brandon Tanev was sending a message to the Seattle Kraken and that he targeted Shane Wright intentionally and purposefully. Now, whether his beef is with Shane or not, I don't think it was. But Brandon Tanev intentionally selected Shane Wright to send a message. And I don't know, maybe message received. But very interesting. I thought that was an interesting comment. I don't know. I think, again, maybe some of it is playful, but it is a good question. It's something that we've been talking about, somewhat on this podcast. And now Dan Bilesma basically leaving it up to our imagination. It's an interesting choice of words. It's also, I mean, am I completely surprised that he didn't answer that question? No. Do I think he has an answer for that question? Abso-freaking-lutely. And of course, now we wonder what it is or was, so perhaps. Coming up, though, on today's episode of Locked On Kraken, let's talk about Bylsma's first year. We're going to hear from him reflecting on his first year and then really compare this year to years past. It's not the worst based on our record, but it's not far off. We'll get into that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe, or sign in to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed. As easily as you stream your favorite shows, it's gaming made simple, and it's all on Fire TV. With 4K streaming, you have access to more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. You can also play high-quality Xbox games at a fraction of the cost of a console. Already have a console? A Fire TV Stick 4K device is more affordable and easier to travel with, allowing you to take your or your kids' games wherever you plug in. Head to Amazon.com/firetv.com to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices including Fire TV Stick 4K, second generation, Fire TV Stick 4K Max, first and second generation, and Fire TV Cube, third generation. Hey, Seattle hockey fans, we are here for another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team every single day. Erica Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken, also the co-host of the Women's Hockey Report alongside Rachel Donner. Now, that show lives on the Locked On NHL channel, and it airs every Saturday. I should say most Saturdays, because we dropped the episode early today because on Saturday, tomorrow, we have World Championships super early in the morning, especially for my Pacific time folks. So we wanted to get that episode out. We talk about, again, hearing rumors and perhaps an upcoming announcement that Seattle will be one of the expansion cities for your PWHL. That would be very exciting. And again, that might be the thing that gets me to the Emerald City, but we will have to continue on with that. Want to give you an update. We are in the first period, about to close out the first period. The Abbotsford Canucks lead the Coachella Valley Firebirds 1-0. Got that first score or that first goal in the game. And so Max Sasson got the goal, and it's Nike Coco who is in net for the Coachella Valley Firebirds. We have some guys that we saw in the NHL playing for your Coachella Valley Firebirds, and of course we will talk about that a little bit later. But I want to go back to Dan Bilesma, because I think in his exit interviews, just like all of the exit interviews, really interesting nuggets. There was also an article on the Seattle Kraken website. Kraken coach Bylsma learned who he could count on. During a trying season getting to know his players, Kraken coach Dan Bilesma feels he found something after the March trade deadline that needs to be maintained. It's a great article by Jeff Baker, kind of mashing up a lot of what we heard from Dan Bilesma. And, you know, I think that he definitely had some things to learn. It was definitely a learning season. And I want you to hear some of the things that Dan Bilesma was hearing from players, as well as how he is reflecting even though he said, hey, like it's been 24 hours, I might need more time to fully reflect. But in his immediate assessment of what he learned and how he wants to improve, he talked about that as well. Let's hear from Dan Bilesma talking a little bit more about perhaps what players were telling him as he was talking to them on locker room cleanout day.
I'll say disappointed, almost to a man, having conversations with all the guys today. But also hopeful. The way we played the last 19 games, wasn't necessarily perfect in all regards, but the way we played on the ice, the way we played for each other is how we want to do it, and evidence that it can be successful if we all buy in. And I think overall, the 82 games, I'm going to talk about consistency of putting that on the ice. That's where we fell short, and just having a chip on our shoulder and coming back next year with the energy and the commitment to do it for 180 days, 82.
And so again, there's the consistency that Dan Bilesma wants to have. Talked about how it's been a disappointment this season. I mean, we definitely talked about that on the podcast, right? It's been a challenging season, a disappointing season. There was a lack of accountability at times, a lack of communication at times. We heard from players like Jordan Eberle, a lack of consistency. We heard from players like Jared McCann, a lack of focus are things that I was saying. And so, the ways in which this team is going to move forward, that's why the last handful of games seemed so critically important. And if indeed, going back to our earlier conversation, there was a little bit of tension, a little bit of beef, a little bit of, I don't know what you want to say, but if there were problems in the locker room and then those problems got traded away, yeah, maybe that was the motivation to not tank, but to see what this team could do if that was the problem, because you had a 20 games, roughly 20 games to figure out if they were the problem or if you're the problem. And so if no one loses their jobs after this hockey season, sounds like Ronnie Francis has still got a job. Disco Dan still got a job. If there's no movement on the coaching perspective, which I didn't think was going to happen anyway, if there's limited movement when it comes to the players, then perhaps what this organization figured out after the Four Nations face-off break is that, yeah, or I should say after the trade deadline, is that, yeah, maybe for better or worse, whether we like it or not, some of what left at the deadline was actually the problem. And, if this roster wanted to prove that would motivate them. That would motivate me, right? To play better. I've been telling you that this is the problem. You finally take care of the problem. Now, what excuse do I have without kind of putting myself in a bad situation? I've been saying this is the problem. You handle the problem. And now what's my excuse? Well, there shouldn't be one. If anything, hopefully you're motivated to play how you weren't able to play because there was this problem. I'm just putting that out there as a potential something to think about. I don't know that we'll ever get the full picture, the full story of what was going on. And, maybe it was not as simple as it was one guy. It was one thing that happened between one guy and, some other guy, and it didn't work out. And we had to maybe it wasn't that simple. But there sure was something that changed, because the moxie factor, the grit factor, the communication, the playing for pride all changed. Now, what the Kraken have to be careful about is that was also a snapshot, not a, as we would like to say in, like people who work with stats a lot, it was not a longitudinal study. It was a glimpse. Ever watch The Family Man? Clink, clink. It was a glimpse. By definition, a la that movie, The Family Man, great movie. Téa Leoni was great in that movie. Nick Cage, great in that movie. Anyway, it's a glimpse. And what can't happen is that we got so excited about the glimpse that we forgot to put in the work for the whole season. And I think Dan Bilesma knows that. Here's a little bit more of what he had to say during exit interviews.
Ask me this one tomorrow. Give me a little bit more time. I think managing the team and the personalities, I don't think it's changed, but it's critically important to the success of the team is getting the team and the individual players on the same page and pulling in the same direction, and with a unified mindset, identity. That's going to be huge going forward for our team and this group of guys. And that's, when I talk about evaluation of the year and saying inconsistent, that's not something I take very easily, because that's the job of the coach. And I think we made some strides, but I think clearly that's where both this team and me as a coach have to improve for this team to have success next year. They're personal highlights for me, because they might not necessarily show up as the 35 wins that we had, but I think there have been a few particular moments where the group has realized and started to spawn the belief that if we play a certain way and we play together, we can beat anybody at any given time. And we've had some, Carolina is probably one of those games, and there are a few other ones, but they only provide belief and hope for this team and for me in the future going forward.
I really appreciated in that clip Dan Bilesma taking responsibility for if there's inconsistency with a team, that is on the coach. And I've talked about that. I do like this coaching staff. And there were just things that were happening that you have to look at the coaching staff. If this isn't being effective, if this isn't working, consistency being one of them, communication being one of them, those are things that ultimately, yes, the players are responsible for. But if the players aren't doing that and they know that they should be doing it, or, then how is the coaching staff holding them accountable? And this is an interesting thing about Dan Bilesma and his approach. And that's why I mentioned Jeff Baker's article, because, and again, we'll go player by player throughout the season, but identity, building things the right way. I told you this was going to be a coaching staff that I felt was going to lean into professional development. And I've told you in maybe not these exact words, but this takes patience. This takes time. This takes investing in players. And that's not easy work. And that work doesn't always yield the immediate results that are expected in this kind of a business. This is a business where you have to win games. And so, the fact that Dan Bilesma could open up and say that there are things that he has to take responsibility for. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And this is what Chandler Stevenson had to say, Jeff Baker quoting him in that story I mentioned. That's on the NHL.com/Kraken website. It's nice to have a coach that's a human being first and not a coach first, said Senator Chandler Stevenson, who came over from Vegas, as we know. I think that's something that he is really good at. Obviously, there's a fine line between those two, but I think that that's a big thing, especially for a young team, to have a coach that really gets it and understands. So that's high praise coming from a veteran, a Stanley Cup champion, someone coming into the Seattle Kraken organization. And that's always what I believed in. I also told you that not only after Four Nations, not only after the trade line, but especially when we got Vince Dunn back and when we got Eberle back, the focus of the team changed noticeably when those guys were around. And I love Jaden Schwartz. I think Jaden Schwartz did a lot of work that he likely will never get credit for in this season. And Vince Dunn, Jordan Eberle, their leadership styles are different. And that's why they make a perfect cluster of leaders for this Seattle Kraken team. We've also heard that Matty Beniers, who was an alternate captain this year, is stepping into that, being able to communicate with the team. So I think this is very interesting. And just a few things that we're going to close out here with Dan Bilesma before we give another Firebirds update and I tell you what the playoffs are going to look like for them. Let's go back to Bylsma once more. And then coming up on Locked On Kraken, I'm going to give you some Firebirds Friday updates.
I think this is where Ron is very good at identifying those areas of the team, both growth from development and draft picks and development of those players in our organization, and identifying, what the team needs, maybe from, the free agent market or. So we've had the conversations, we've talked about those things, and I have some input for sure, but I think Ron has a real clear and distinct idea where the team needs to go and how it's going to get better, and we'll see that happen.
Hey, well, here's hoping. There's definitely improvement that we want to see. What those changes will be and how they make a difference to be determined, but we will, of course, stay right here locked on Kraken and have all the updates coming up. Let's do a Firebirds Friday update for you so you do get a chance to watch playoff hockey in the AHL and in the ECHL. Locked On Kraken today, brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like the energy of a live game, whether it's catching a last-minute MLB showdown or soaking up the excitement of an NHL or PWHL matchup as we march towards the playoffs. But finding a great seat at a great price, that used to be a challenge until I found Game Time. Game Time makes scoring last-minute tickets easier than ever. Prices actually drop as the event gets closer. And with their all-in pricing, you see the total cost up front. No surprises at checkout. So if you want a ball on a budget, Game Time is for you. You can save up to 60% off by buying last-minute sports tickets, comedy, concerts, and, of course, theater. With seat views before you buy, no surprise fees, and a lowest price guarantee, you can book with total confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Seattle hockey fans, thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala, your host of Locked On Kraken, also had an episode with Rachel Donner for the Women's Hockey Report, part of the Locked On NHL channel. So go check that out. And as far as your Firebirds, we're still at the end of the first. No action, but they are down 1-0. And you know what? That's okay, because the Firebirds have clinched home ice for the first round of the Calder Cup playoffs. They were able to do that the other day, and they will face either the San Jose Barracuda or the Calgary Wranglers. We're waiting on some things to go final, but the first game of round one is going to take place Tuesday, April 22nd, Game 2, Saturday, April 26th, and Game 3, if necessary, Sunday, April 27th. I already told you, if you listened to Monday's episode, about our Kansas City Mavericks, and you're not going to want to miss that. They're actually playing the Tulsa team, so I should be able to get some Kansas City Mavericks coverage for you while they're here local. This is a third straight playoff appearance by the Coachella Valley Firebirds, and Dan Bilesma and a few of these players are actually making a fourth consecutive trip because Disco Dan was an assistant coach with our Charlotte Checkers when we were co-parenting, as I like to say, with the Florida Panthers. So fan appreciation tonight. And, we have a super fan of the Coachella Valley Firebirds, Tom Buck, that once joined us on the podcast. I got to say, as much as I love Allison Lucan, we've had Linda Cohn on the show, Everett Fitzhugh's been on the show, Steve Mayer from the NHL, Shane Wright joined. You remember he was kind of sideways, his camera orientation, that was really wild. We've had a lot of people, but I have to say, Tom Buck was probably my favorite guest because I've been watching his videos and he just has a passion for what he does when it comes to tech and gear and all of that stuff. And I've been watching his videos. And so when I saw that, because he's one of the creators now that uses like the Husky, right? The Husky chests. That was like a big thing for a little while. Yes, that's how much YouTube I watch. But anyway, I saw that he had one of those. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And then I started like looking, in the background. I think people's backgrounds, I like taking a look at what they got there, how they kind of design their set or whatever. And I started seeing like little Coachella Valley Fire. I started seeing Seattle Kraken stuff. I saw Fuego. I was like, oh my gosh, he's a fan just like me. So I hope, Tom, that you got to fan appreciation night. I hope, Tom, that the Coachella Valley Firebirds get some goals for you. It's Coco and net tonight. But we also know that Coco, Rookie of the Year, all Rookie of the Year team for this season. That's pretty awesome. He looked great when he made his NHL debut, got thrown in there, and freaking held it down. So the Coachella Valley Firebirds, they are going to go dancing into the Calder Cup playoffs. And there are some pop-up events that are happening that I want you to know about if you were in the area. So on Monday, April 21st at Burgers and Beer is the pop-up schedule. And so this is going to be the street team, right? For the Coachella Valley Firebirds. They're going to have merchandise, ticket giveaways, Firebirds players and personalities and so much more happening. Each event is going to be from 3 p.m. Pacific to 8 p.m. Pacific or until supplies run out. So again, Burgers and Beers on Monday, April 21st. And, then on Thursday, April 24th, they're back at Burgers and Beers. But so the first Burgers and Beers is in La Quinta, the second one in Rancho Mirage, and then the shops at El Paseo on Friday, April 25th, Palm Desert, California. So I love that the Firebirds have some pretty cool things going on there. They've clinched a playoff home ice advantage, which is great. The opponent will be decided following the result of the Barracuda at Wranglers game this Sunday afternoon. So even though they clinched home because of the Barracuda and Wranglers series, they have to wait to see who they're going to play for Sunday's game. So you know what that means? You're going to listen to Locked On Kraken over the weekend so I can have you ready to go. That's how we're going to do it. And so, yes, while the Kraken do not have any playoff hockey, their affiliates sure do. And so we will be keeping up with the Firebirds. We will be keeping up with the Kansas City Mavericks, especially when they come to Tulsa on the back end of the series. And we'll talk about it here on Locked On Kraken. But I think we got some interesting insights from Dan Bilesma. But what I loved the most is that he took accountability. And I hope that we're looking at more than just a glimpse. I hope the last 19 games were more than just a glimpse. I hope they were the promise of what Eberle has been kind of injecting into this team, is that if we do the right things now, if we build the right habits now, if we work hard and use that to motivate ourselves, and Dan Bilesma talked about that too in his exit interview. We'll probably get back to that at some point. But he talked about that season 2 where the Kraken make the playoffs, but then they fall to Dallas in game 7. And the disappointment and how that sparked, like it lit a fire. And he wants this season, this disappointment of a season, to do the same thing for this Seattle Kraken team. Is it going to work? Well, I guess we got to watch next season to figure it out. Erica L. Ayala reminding you to be kind to yourself, be kind to others. And hey, 'tis the season where we hold fast, we stay true, and we say loud and proud always, let's go Kraken. But we get to add, also as always, really, we should always do this. We should also add, let's go Firebirds and let's go Mavericks. I will catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.